Hello and welcome to this section. In this one, I would like to talk about auto scaling inside the AWS console. So the idea of auto scaling is that, let's say we want to have a minimum number of EC2 instances running for all the time, and we want to guarantee that these number of machines are running all the time. It doesn't matter if something happened to one of the availability zones or if something happened to one of the EC2 instances. We want to make sure, for example, we are having at least 3 EC2 instances running in our availability zones. Let's say we have 3 availability zones and we want to guarantee that we have 1 EC2 instance in each of these zones. And another use case of auto scaling is that we can create some policies and we can say, let's say if our CPU utilization of our EC2 instances goes higher than a specific number, then we want to spin up more and more EC2 instances in order to be able to distribute the load between multiple EC2 instances and more EC2 instances and have a lower utilization on average on the machines. So for checking the auto scaling, we have to go to the EC2 console. So I'm going to click on the EC2 console, and on the left side here we have the auto scaling category. So we have the launch configuration and auto scaling groups. So auto scaling is something that is working with the integration to the load balancers and also EC2 instances. So we need to have a load balancer and some EC2 instances to test this one. We will see it related to the EC2 instances. We can always create them from the scratch, or we can use the one that we have. But in this demo, I'm going to use auto scaling groups first. And with this one, I'm going to define some EC2 instances that I would like to spin up. And then I'm going to put them behind the load balancer and configure the auto scaling for them. So let's get started. I'm going to click on auto scaling groups. And here we can create auto scaling group. And basically we are defining the characteristics of an EC2 instance. So go ahead and click on get started at the bottom. If you notice, it's exactly the way that we are going to create an EC2 instance. I'm going to select this first AMI, the Amazon Linux 2 AMI. I'll select the type. I'll stick with the T2 micro here, and I'm clicking next. We are familiar with these steps. It's a little bit different. It asks for the launch configuration. I'm going to give it a name, auto scaling, for example. Scale-config. It is asking for us if this is a spot instance. It's not if we have any IAM role. I don't have any IAM role right now, and for the monitoring purpose, if you want to enable CloudWatch for monitoring. And there's an advanced details here, and this is actually familiar for us, the user data. And I'm going to put the user data that we used to use before for our web server configuration. If you remember, this was the previous script that I provided. I'm going to just change the web2 to web server to make it consistent. So what I'm going to ask from the auto scale is I'm going to ask to create some EC2 instance for us and run these commands inside the EC2 instance, which is going to update the YAM and install the Apache and create an index.html file and a health check file, and then it is going to start Apache server and make sure that it is going to start after any reboot. I'm going to keep the default configuration here for the IP addressing, and I want to have a public IP addresses for instances so I can hit them directly beside the load balancer. I'm going to click on add storage. This is going to be same as the process that we are usually creating EC2 instance. And the security group that we need to access, I'm going to select an existing security group, and I'm selecting ITrepo Linux security group, which is HTTP and SSH, and review. And basically it's like we are creating a EC2 instance, but look at here, it says create launch configuration. It's not any EC2 instance here. It's a little bit different. When I'm selecting create launch configuration, it asks for the SSH key for the authentication. I'm choosing the same SSH key that we used to use. And then after create launch configuration, actually we go to another step, which is create auto scaling group now. So this is creating an auto scaling, and we want to tell AWS that we want to spin up a bunch of machines, and we want to guarantee that have these machines in different availability zones. And basically this auto scaling group is going to use that EC2 instance that we previously configured with those settings and user data in it. So I'm going to give it a name here and just give it my, for example, auto scaling group. And it is asking for us that what would be the number of the instances. Start with 1, for example, instance. But for this purpose of demo, because I have 3 availability zones in the Oregon region, I'm going to put 3 here, and I would like to have at least 3 instances all the time. This is going to guarantee me that always 3 EC2 instances are running all the time. If something happened to one of them, AWS is going to create another one for me automatically. So I'm going to stick with the default VPC. I don't have any VPC. I can create a new one from here also. And for the subnet, which is exactly the availability zone, if you click here, you can see your availability zones. So select all of them. This means that you want to put each of these EC2 instances in these availability zones. So one on the first one, US West 2B, one in the second one, US West 2A, and one in US West 2C. If you don't forget to add all of them, then you end up putting all of your instances in one availability zone, which is not a good thing. So there's an advanced details also here, and load balancing option. We can select this option, and if I click here, I can select my load balancer. And this is actually my classic load balancer, and we are using this classic load balancer for distributing traffic among our EC2 instances. And also I'm going to select my target groups. I can't remember exactly which one was working, but I'm going to select my TG here, and I'll double check later to see if those instances are actually registered on that target. But we have to make sure that we are going to check this one. Related to the health check, do we want the auto scaling check the EC2 instances health directly or the load balancer? I'm going to stick with the load balancer. And the check grace period for checking this health, it's 300 seconds. I'm going to reduce this one to 100 seconds. Just give this some time for that user data to work. So the rest I'm going to stick with the default, and then I click next to configure scaling policies. In this step, we can keep this group at its initial size, which it was 3, and we can hit next. So this is going to guarantee that we have at least 3 instances, or we can create some policies. The policies are really useful. For example, we can say scale between 3 to, for example, 6 instances. So this will be the minimum and maximum size of the group that we are having. So minimum 3 and maximum 6. And then we can create some situations, some rules actually here to tell to the AWS what to do in case something happens. So we are going to give it a name, for example, test. And then there's a metric here. It could be average CPU utilization. It could be network in, network out, and application load balancer request per target, for example. I'll stick with the CPU utilization, and I put a target value here, for example, 85, and I put 300 seconds for warm up after scaling, and we can disable scale in also for this rule. We can set the auto scaling group using a step or simple scaling policies, and in this situation we can create increase group size and decrease group size. So we can add an alarm, and we can say, for example, we don't want to have any notification. We can work on the average CPU utilization, other stuff like disks and network metrics. If it is more than 85%, for example, for more than 5 minutes, then we want to have this alarm, and based on this alarm we want to add, for example, one more instance, and this is gonna be the time of the warm up again for 300 seconds, for example. And we can decrease if, for example, we need to add another alarm with the same idea if the CPU utilization, for example, came below 85% for more than 5 minutes, and then we are going to remove these instances. If you want to test these increase and decrease group size, then you have to actually do something with the EC2 instance. You have to make sure that the CPU utilization jumps to 100% or something more than 85%, and then you will see that the AWS is start creating more EC2 instances for you, and when the CPU utilization goes down, it will remove them for you. But for this demo, I don't need this one. I can show you how the auto scaling works without even these ones. So if you remember, if I go back, we want to have at least 3 instances in these availability zones, and we can make sure that we always have 3 EC2 instances. That's why I keep this group at this initial size. I hit next. If we need to have any notification, we can add a notification. We can just give it a name, for example, test, and an email address for the notification. If something happened, it will send an email for us. And the last one is basically tag, and I give it a name, and I put the auto scaling and hit review, and then we are basically good to go. I'm going to create the auto scaling group for us. It says successfully create auto scaling. I'm going to close this auto scaling. This is the auto scaling configuration that we can see, and the number of instances right now is 0. I'm going to go to my instances on the left side, and we have to wait to see what will happen. So I'm going to give it some time to see what will happen. So you can see here that the auto scaling spin a bunch of EC2 instances, and these ones, the running ones, are technically the ones that the auto scales are running right now, and they all have the public IP address. For the testing purposes, what I'm going to do is I'm trying to access the IP addresses directly to see if they're working. So copy this one to the clipboard as an example and paste here, and I can see the web server, and another one just as an example. I can see these websites. So another thing I want to test is I'm going to my load balancer, and we put them behind the load balancer. I'm going to get the DNS name of the load balancer and try to access also from the load balancer, and we can see the websites. Going back to the instances, you can see that this is gonna be in the hand of the auto scaling. It is going to shut down the EC2 instances and spin up the new ones based on the situation they have in the multiple availability zones. So if we, let's say, terminate some of these ones, I'm going to select let's say these two, and I'm going to terminate them. If I wait for a while, you will see that the auto scaling is going to spin up more EC2 instances back here. And we can even see, if you go to the auto scaling, into the auto scaling groups, there are some numbers here that will show us how many instances are running, how many is desired, what is the minimum, what is the maximum, what are the availability zones. And here basically you can also monitor what is going on, and you can see all the instances and their states. So we can do a quick test here. So right now our web servers are up and running. I again try to access these web servers from the IP addresses. So this is the first one, it's working. The second one is gonna be the same idea, and the third one is this one. So 3 web servers, they're all working. And this was part of the auto scaling, right? Because we said if we have 3 web servers and they're working, then this is gonna be fine. And another one is if I go to the load balancer, I actually clean up the rest of the load balancers to make it easy. So we just selected this load balancer, and I can see the website from the load balancer. If I go back to instances, let's say something happened to 2 of these instances. If I go to these instances and terminate them, then AutoScale would understand that something goes wrong with these ones, and then it's try to replace them. Why? Because we put the health check on the load balancer, and the load balancer will do the health check, and it can understand that just one of the nodes are in service and the rest they're not in the service anymore, and we will lose the connectivity to 2 of the servers. But one of them is fine, this one is fine, and the load balancer should be also fine. And the auto scaling will understand this, and it will try to replace these 2 EC2 instances. So I'm going to give it some time, refresh the page again to see what will happen. We can see that 2 of the EC2 instances are down, and we terminated it, and there's just 1 running right now. So this one is timeout, this one is timeout, and this one is working actually. If I refresh the page, it is working, and the load balancer is still working. It means that it is using this node, and we are waiting for the auto scale to kick in and start spinning up other EC2 instance. And as you can see, it is starting another one, and this one with a new IP address. And if I select this IP address, after a while I should be able to hit this web server. I'm just waiting for this one to start up, and there is a data user that the script should be run inside it, and then it's gonna be fine. So I give it more time, I'll come back later. And I'm back, I'll hit refresh again, and you can see that even the third one is running right now. So AutoScale is trying to run the third EC2 instance. So if I go back to this one and hit refresh, and actually it's working right now. So it means that this web server is up and running. 2 of them is working, and if I wait a little bit, again this one it's gonna come up and start working. If I go to the load balancer, they all should be fine behind the load balancer. So I can go to instances, and you can see this is probably the last one. This is the third one, and if you wait a little bit more, this one also will change to in service. So technically, in a nutshell, auto scaling is a really good feature. It will give us an opportunity to have desired instances up and running in multiple availability zones, and we can create policies based on the number of, let's say, network inputs, network outputs, and CPU utilization. We can increase and decrease number of our EC2 instances. Also, we can, after you're done with this auto scaling, you can easily clean up everything. If you go to the auto scaling and auto scaling group here, you can easily go to the action and delete this one. If you select yes, this is going to take you a while. Gradually, auto scaling is going to take care of everything and gradually deleting all the instances. If you go back to your instances, you'll see that it is going to shut down these instances one by one and terminate them for you. I hope this was useful for you, and I'll see you in the next one.